Hello, and welcome to another episode of Tierah Ruins Things with Science, a podcast about the science of infectious diseases in pop culture. I am Tierah, as always, and I am here to ruin your favorite TV shows and movies by telling you how badly they butchered the science. Today's piece of media is The Last of Us, the HBO drama about a killer fungus that rapidly takes over the entire world and turns people into zombies. In Canada, if you have Crave, it's available there, or it's probably on Max, HBO's own streaming service, and you can rent it on all the usual sites like YouTube and Apple. I am a big fan of this zombie fungus. It's one of several parasites that exhibit mind control over its host, and I'm looking forward to talking about it. I talked about another one called Toxoplasma briefly in episode 2, which was about the movie Venom and parasites of all kinds. So if you want more parasite talk when this episode is over, go listen to episode 2 if you haven't already. Now, I have never played the Last of Us video games, but I've been excited for the show since it was filming, because I live in Edmonton, Alberta, where parts of the show were filmed. And I also used to live in Calgary and went to classes at one of the universities in the exact building where some of the scenes from the second episode were filmed. Beyond that, it gets better. I also have a friend who worked on the show as a set decorator. So after all the episodes were released, I sat down on Zoom and had a conversation with him about his experiences, what it was like working and decorating on the set. And I'm releasing that as a bonus episode. In the bonus episode, there are some really cool behind-the-scenes details from the show, and I spilled the tea on a secret that I had to keep for like a year and a half when he asked me for help in decorating some of the lab scenes. So if you want to hear all about that and all the gossip from behind the scenes, just go listen to the bonus episode after this one. This will be the last regular season episode of the first season of Tierah Ruins Things with Science, but hopefully I'll be back with more seasons to come, as there are just so many science-based movies and TV shows out there for me to ruin. All I ask at this point is that if you enjoyed listening to me ruin things, please go leave me a rating or even a short review if you're feeling generous on whatever platform you listen to the show on. Also, please do get in touch on social media or at tierahruinsthings@gmail.com if you have a suggestion for a future episode.
Just to be clear, you do think microorganisms pose a threat?
Oh, in the most dire terms.
Not bacteria, not viruses, so...
Fungus.
So, if you didn't watch The Last of Us, I'll give a quick recap. In the first episode, people around the world suddenly start turning into zombie-like creatures all within the space of a day or two. We slowly find out that it is due to cordyceps fungi that infected a grain processing plant in Jakarta, which happens to be the world's largest such plant, like for real, and this plant supplies any sort of wheat-containing product pretty much everywhere. The main story follows Joel, who is played by Pedro Pascal, in the post-apocalyptic world as he gets contracted to protect Ellie, who's played by Bella Ramsey. And Ellie happens to be the only person so far discovered who is somehow immune to the infection. There have already been a ton of articles written about the science of the show, and I'll link to some that I looked at in the show notes. And you can also find the show notes and links and everything at tierahruinsthings.com. To sum up, I think they did a really good job on this. They had scientific consultants and really put a lot of effort into making most of this based on actual science rather than completely made up for the spectacle. It really reminded me of Michael Crichton's skill at taking what we know is real science and then how he would alter and build on that a little piece at a time, tiny steps by tiny steps, until you aren't actually sure where the line between obviously real and obviously fake is. Most of the discussions of the science of The Last of Us avoid spoilers, which is polite of them, but I'm not going to. So be warned, if you want to finish the show without knowing the ending, don't listen to this episode yet. So there's really not much to pick apart in the first episodes. I really like the way they designed the fungus zombies, how they have the fungus growing out of their heads and taking over their bodies. There are some scenes where you see moving tendrils of fungal hyphae, those little string-like things coming out of people's mouths, and even that is kind of actually based on what really happens to the ants when they become infected. Not that the tendrils actually move around enough that you could see it easily with your naked eye, but they do grow and reach out of the ant's body and neck. So yeah, overall, I love the show and had no real complaints about it until the very last episode, which I will get to, but first let's get deeper into some science. I was excited particularly for episode 2 because the first scenes in Jakarta, all of those lab scenes, those were filmed on the Southern Alberta Institute of Technology campus, otherwise known as SAIT, and that's where I first went to university. They used the Senator Burns building, which is the one where I had basically all of my classes when I took the chemical technology program at SAIT in 2003. There's a lot more I could talk about here, but if I do, I'll spoil the bonus episode, and I don't want to do that. So if you want to hear more behind-the-scenes details about the set decoration of this sequence in particular and for the whole show, go listen to the bonus episode. For this one, let's just dive in and let me tell you about cordyceps fungi, what it does to ants, and how I think it would have to mutate in order to be able to infect humans. So first off, what is the difference between cordyceps and ophiocordyceps, the name that's used in the show? So I went through a little while where I was obsessed with zombies as a pop culture phenomenon, and I consumed a lot of media around it, so I can tell you that cordyceps, being the zombie fungus, has been floating around in the pop culture sphere for a long time, and it's mainly just called cordyceps. Cordyceps itself is a genus of fungi, and ophiocordyceps is a related genus in the same order. Ophiocordyceps unilateralis is the specific fungus that's mentioned in the show. So if you don't know what an order is, it's one of the levels of classification we use in taxonomy to tell how every living thing is related to each other. The highest level is domain, which splits up bacteria and non-bacteria, then kingdom, which is, the kingdom of animals, plants, fungi, that sort of thing. The next levels are phylum, class, then you have order, and then family, genus, and species. All organisms have a 2 or sometimes 3-part name that tells you their genus and species. So for the show, when I say Ophiocordyceps unilateralis, Ophiocordyceps is the genus and unilateralis is the species. Taxonomy is super fun to get into, and scientists will get into some really heated arguments over it. But species can change classifications all the time. So let's just say that cordyceps and ophiocordyceps are related. They're both parasites of bugs, but they aren't exactly the same thing. The main difference between them is that cordyceps can infect lots of different bugs and arthropods, whereas ophiocordyceps infects formicine ants only. And the Ophiocordyceps unilateralis in the show infects specifically carpenter ants. Now, carpenter ants, they're basically found everywhere as they're fairly hardy, but Ophiocordyceps is a little more picky in where it lives. Due to this pickiness, which in more science terms, we call that host specificity, I don't think it would grow on grain either. So maybe the grain that causes the worldwide infection was infested with ants that were infected with the Ophiocordyceps but hadn't yet fully been taken over by it. Cordyceps and Ophiocordyceps, they're found mainly in tropical forests around the equator area. So Brazil, Central America, Indonesia, which is where Jakarta is, Thailand, Central Africa, that sort of thing, right around the equator. And it's found there because it needs a moist, warm, temperate environment provided by the tropics. It infects ants by releasing spores into the environment, which attach to other ants' bodies as they're just walking by, minding their own business, or if it happens to fall directly on them. They can also become infected by eating something that is covered in the spores. The spores then act like drill heads and bury their way into the ant's body through the use of digestive enzymes to get through the ant's hard exoskeleton. Ants don't have an adaptive immune system like mammals and humans do. Their main defenses are from their hard exoskeleton. They do have some antimicrobial peptides, and they have a simple type of white blood cell that eats up all the smaller invaders like bacteria. The important thing being they lack the adaptive T and B cells that humans and other mammals have. This means that the fungi can take over pretty easily because it also secretes chemicals that inhibit the primitive ant immune system, such as it is, and it interferes with the ant's serotonin, noradrenaline, and dopamine also. I am not an ant scientist, but papers I read say that interfering with these chemicals can cause major disruptions in the ant's behavior, as they heavily rely on these chemicals and pheromones to know what to do, like to know when to go to sleep or when to forage and when to hide. Interfering with these systems causes disorientation, confusion, disruption of the circadian rhythm, and possibly even hallucinations.
Travels through its circulatory system to the ant's brain and then floods it with hallucinogens, thus bending the ant's mind to its will.
So they leave their nests at odd times, and they'll come down from the higher parts of trees to leaves that are about a foot off the ground or so. They'll crawl and stumble around and eventually make their way to the underside of a leaf, where it will bite onto the bottom of the leaf, and the fungus causes the ant to clamp its jaws closed. To do this, the fungus is inside the body, growing and manipulating its muscles, the ant's muscles, through secretion of an enzyme that causes hyperactivity. So I imagine it to be similar to restless leg syndrome. If you've ever experienced this, you'll know how awful it is. You just get this compulsion to squeeze and twitch your muscles, and if you don't, it feels like they're burning. It can be very painful. Side note, if this is you, maybe go get your levels of iron and magnesium checked, because it stopped happening to me when I started taking those vitamins regularly. So just go talk to your doctor about it. By the time the ant attaches itself to the bottom of the leaf, its head is only about 50% ant cells and 50% fungal cells. The fungus then starts to secrete enzymes that degenerate and degrade the ant's muscles. At the same time, tiny little fingers of the fungal hyphae start emerging from everywhere on the ant's body. These hyphae grow out until they cover the ant and create a little blanket that attaches it to the leaf permanently. By then, the ant is mainly just a shell of ant filled with fungal cells, and it dies. To reproduce, the fungus grows a tall stalk out of the back of the ant's neck, and this stalk develops a bulb in the middle, which is the thing that produces the spores and releases them into the environment, starting the process all over again. Now that, my friends, is a very gruesome way to go, but it absolutely fulfills all the classic zombie tropes. It's infectious, it secretes chemicals that take over your body and interfere with your neurotransmitters, and it controls your muscle movements, and it replicates inside you until you die. It's actually quite a slow process, too. After the ant becomes infected, it takes about 3 to 6 days until it's at the point where it's on the underside of the leaf and clamps its jaws. And then 7 days after it dies, before the white hyphae cover the ant and attach it to the leaf. In the show, they say it was, within 24 to 36 hours after people ate the contaminated food and when they started showing signs of being taken over. So it was only a day or two. So this is definitely a sped up process compared to what happens in ants. The stalk that grows out of the back of the ant's neck there, it grows the bulb that releases the spores. That can take weeks to grow, and the whole process can take around a month, lasting anywhere up to, I believe, 3 months or so before the ant's body is entirely consumed and disintegrates. So again, the show took a little bit of liberties with this, as the bodies of the infected are still basically functional human bodies. They have their muscle systems intact for all the running and attacking and eating. But the fungus does centralize in the head, it does take over the brain, and it does control behavior. Since we know that ophiocordyceps fungus can't infect humans, perhaps the faster-acting nature is a side effect of the adaptations that would have to occur for it to be able to infect humans at all. I'm going to talk about that more in just a moment. Before I go on, I want to briefly mention another movie that talks about cordyceps fungi, and that movie, based on a graphic novel, is The Girl with All the Gifts. This book and movie focuses on the same fungus, but in that one, the zombies are called hungries, and it spreads through blood and saliva, as well as spores. Now, it's been a little bit since I saw that movie, but basically the second generation hungries retain their sense of self, but they also feed on flesh. The movie itself was enjoyable. I liked it. I have a major beef, though, with their representation of the fungus and how it spreads. I'm not going to spoil it outright here, so you can go watch it if you want to. I do have a couple links in the show notes with some more info and spoilers, but basically this movie says that ophiocordyceps spreads only through one specific mechanism that some fungi do in fact use, but is 100% wrong for this species. So what I just described a couple minutes ago above, that's the correct way that the fungus spreads, through the spores and then attaching to ants as they walk by.
If you have to get bit to be infected, then who bit the first person?
So this is a fungus that survives in ants and so far has never been known to infect a human. But why? That's the burning question, isn't it? Could this happen? Are we vulnerable? Are we all going to wake up one day and eat infected pancake mix and then break free and eat our neighbors? The short answer is, if you really want to eat your neighbors, then you be free. You do you, hun, but I don't think you're going to be able to blame it on mind-controlling fungus. I do have a theory about how this could work, but it's pure speculation. I could find no sources on anyone else speculating about how this could happen, academic or not, so I'm just going to go with my science hunch on this one. Firstly, cordyceps and ophiocordyceps can't infect humans for a few reasons, but a big part of it is that we have a much better, stronger immune system. We have a ton of better ways than ants to detect fungal pathogens when they're infecting us, and dozens of different white blood cells, including adaptive T and B cells, to kill them. Not only that, but I think the most important part of it is that our body temperatures are much higher than ants. It was hard for me to find a solid academic source on what an ant's normal body temperature is, but ants are cold-blooded creatures that rely on their environment to regulate their body temperature. Tropical forests are usually anywhere between 20 to 30 degrees Celsius-ish. That's 68 to 86 in freedom units. And so the fungus is adapted to grow at these temperatures. However, human body temperature is anywhere from 36 or 37 to 39-ish. For ophiocordyceps fungus to be able to grow inside our bodies at these temperatures, it would have to completely redesign all of its enzymes to work at a higher temperature. So basically, if it does get into our bodies, it can't grow and just lies around as a tasty snack for your white blood cells to eat as they choose. Sort of a buffet, if you will. Ophiocordyceps uses proteases and lipases, which are enzymes that break up proteins and fats, respectively, and another one called chitinase and one called lacase, which help break apart the ant's exoskeleton. Enzymes as a whole are typically very temperature sensitive, and they have a very narrow 1 or 2 degree window where they work properly. When they're too cold, they're inactive, and if they're too hot, their structure just melts apart. Proteins and enzymes are made of long chains of amino acids, which wrap around itself in curls called an alpha helix, and they form side-by-side flat parts called beta sheets, all of which then fold over and onto each other, creating a 3D blob structure. How strong they are and how well they hold together is determined by things like hydrogen bonds and disulfide bridges between the amino acids, and whether the amino acids are polar or nonpolar, meaning how easily they dissolve in water, that sort of thing. Proteins that are meant to work at lower temperatures typically don't have strong bonding and are more flexible, while ones that work at higher temperatures are more rigid and have stronger bonds. So in order to survive in a hot human body, ophiocordyceps would need heat-tolerant enzymes, so it could break apart our tissues and dissolve them to eat, basically. And it would also need some way to evade or suppress our immune system like it does in ants. This is highly unlikely to just evolve spontaneously, but, climate change is occurring at a rapid pace, so who knows? There are, however, pathogens that have evolved to infect humans and live at our body temperature. There are countless ones, in fact, but we have to look no further than the humble Escherichia coli. E. coli has dozens of ways to evade the human immune system, and it also has enzymes that have evolved to survive at our body temperature. So all that would need to happen would be for someone to genetically engineer a strain of ophiocordyceps that has E. coli enzyme genes, and voila. Many bacteria also secrete neurotransmitters. Many of them are commensals that are living in you right now. So I don't think it would be too hard to find analogs for all the mind manipulation genes that ophiocordyceps has either. Point is, though, this won't happen in nature, so we're not at risk of an infected grain-fueled apocalypse anytime soon. But if it did, there's also this. E. coli replicates a lot faster than ophiocordyceps. Like a lot. Ophiocordyceps, like I said, it takes 3 to 6 days to replicate enough to take over an ant 50%, while E. coli duplicates in ideal conditions every 18 to 24 hours. It's one of the fastest duplication times out there for bacteria, so obviously its replication enzymes are very speedy. So I think that, within the realm of suspension of disbelief, that the faster replication speed at which ophiocordyceps takes over the world in The Last of Us, compared with reality, could be a side effect of having replication enzymes that can work at human body temperature.
He thinks that the cordyceps in Ellie has grown with her since birth. Produces a kind of chemical messenger. It makes normal cordyceps think that she's cordyceps. It's why she's immune.
At this point, I'm sure some of you are waiting for me to talk about how Ellie could possibly have tolerated the fungus, and what was it about her that held the infection at bay and made her immune. In the show, they say it's because the cordyceps in her body is circulating everywhere and that it acts as a signal to new cordyceps from when she gets bitten, that she's already infected, and so it doesn't need to do its normal thing like multiplying and secreting hallucinogens. I only have speculation as to what these chemical messengers are intended to be within the show's canon, but it could just be antibodies. From what I've seen, the cordyceps fungi doesn't have any self-suppression mechanisms like they describe. That might explain why she doesn't experience infection from new bites, but not why she wasn't affected when her mother was bitten during pregnancy. So as you may know, I did my undergrad degree with specialization in immunology and infection, so I'm going to very briefly summarize immune tolerance for you. Our immune system has to be able to recognize what is self from what is non-self, and to know what's allowed to be there and what isn't. We have B cells and we have T cells, which are the adaptive immune system. And when the B cells are developing in the bone marrow or the T cells in the thymus, they go through what's called an education. For B and T cells, this process is different, but there are checkpoints in this education to make sure that any B or T cell that is reactive to a self-protein is eliminated. That's the process that goes awry when you have an autoimmune condition. After the B and T cells develop, there are other tolerance mechanisms also to ensure that things that are not self-proteins, but which are safe, like the food we eat, doesn't produce an immune reaction. There's even immunotherapy that you can get for some allergens like cat dander. So what happens is you can swallow a pill or some sort of treatment with cat dander in it, and your regulatory T cells in your gut will recognize what you've eaten and know that it's something that's okay, that's supposed to be there. And then what they do is they tell all your other white blood cells not to react to it. My theory about Ellie is that since her mother was bitten while she was pregnant, the fungal allergens, so things like bits of the cell wall, the proteins, enzymes that make up the cordyceps fungus, they traveled throughout her mother's body, including crossing the placental barrier and into the developing fetus. The fetus would have encountered it in the blood first, and then through the liver, and excreted waste into the amniotic fluid. Then, since we know that in utero, fetuses will drink and swallow the amniotic fluid because this helps with their digestive systems to develop, the fetus's immune system was basically like, all right, this is okay, you've eaten this, that's allowed to be here. This is a very flimsy theory and it may not hold up though, because infants, they have a very rudimentary immune system and their B and T cells, they don't really develop for a couple months after birth. Even then, when they do, they aren't that strong, which is why you can't vaccinate infants right away and why they need multiple boosters of the same vaccine in order for it to be effective. However, the innate tolerance that happens when you eat food is not entirely B and T cell related. There are other white blood cells involved, so it might work. Maybe there was some lingering fungus that was present in her body as an infant, but not enough to cause a problem or a reaction, and slowly it just caused her adaptive immune system to tolerate the fungus as she grew, and then eventually eliminate it, leaving behind just the antibody defense. Then when she was older and got bitten by the zombie, she had the antibodies to prevent a reaction. That's not the whole story, though, as I have another interesting thing that I found. There is a small subset of people who have been shown to be resistant to tuberculosis infection. So tuberculosis is caused by a very hardy, very hard to treat bacteria called Mycobacterium tuberculosis. It's normally very infectious, but one study showed that people who were TB negative and who lived long-term with someone who is TB positive but didn't become infected ended up having a high population of a specific type of natural killer cell. This is a common innate white blood cell that everyone has, including infants, and it's really important in detecting and killing infected cells. People resistant to TB also had more of a hormone called deoxycorticosterone acetate, which allows their macrophages to better control the TB infection. So a macrophage, that's the big eater of your immune system. That's what their name means. So they go around gobbling up all the pathogens that are trying to infect you, including TB. But normally TB has a way of escaping the macrophage's digestion process, and it survives to continue being an infection. So that hormone, known as DOCA, was associated with better resistance to TB. So maybe Ellie produces more of that hormone and has better, stronger white blood cells, so she's able to control the fungal infection a bit better. That also means that if the reason why she's immune is because of an antibody response and this DOCA hormone, that means there could definitely be others out there with the same or similar mutations. This brings us to my one quibble with the show. Again, the next bit is going to contain spoilers for the last episode, so if you haven't seen it yet, go away and come back when you have. Now, I honestly love this show. It's so well done, and the science it's not too far-fetched, and they really put a lot of effort in. But in the last episode, when Joel has taken Ellie to the Firefly camp of researchers that he was trying to get her to this whole time, they say, the Firefly people, they say they're going to help Ellie and also try to find out what makes her resistant to the zombie fungus. The only way they say this can happen is if they take Ellie's brain out and look at the chemical signatures there from the fungus. They haven't told Ellie this. They're just going to put her into surgery with her thinking she's going to wake up, and then they're going to cut her open and take her brain out, killing her. They tell Joel this and assume he's not going to go all psycho killer on them, which turns out to be a wrong assumption. And honestly, I don't blame him for it. Not only because it's cruel to do that without Ellie's consent, but it's totally uncalled for. What happened to starting with some blood tests to sample those chemical messengers and antibodies? Maybe some genetic testing to see what makes her immune system so better? Oh, what's that? They may not have the equipment to do that, you say? And taking her brain is the only way? Bullshit. If they didn't have the equipment to do genetic testing and look at Ellie's immune system, they certainly wouldn't have the equipment to analyze her brain and look at the chemical signatures there. And if they didn't have the equipment, then they should just wait. Wait until they can get it somewhere rather than just killing someone. Go on a raiding party, go to a university and steal some machines. Hell, go to wherever 23andMe had its offices and hole up there. Anything is more logical than just going right to taking out someone's brain. But the fungus mainly takes over the brain, you say, so that's the first place they should start? Well, yeah, except Ellie wasn't taken over by the fungus, so it likely isn't even in her brain. Any, quote, chemical signatures used to identify what makes Ellie unique would be found in her blood, not just in her brain. The brain has almost nothing to do with the day-to-day operation of the immune system. Your bone marrow and your thymus have more to do with it. As I've mentioned already, that's where your adaptive immune system grows. So really, their first step should be some blood tests for sure, and then maybe some genetic testing to see what's going on. It really didn't seem all that logical to me, but, I guess after 20 years of dealing with an apocalypse, maybe logic is out the window and everyone's too desperate to think rationally. All I know is that it really just seemed like a way to have a big dramatic ending for the show rather than to have a good story ending. Maybe they could have added another couple minutes where they explained it had been a few days or a week and they'd already done the genetic testing and the blood test but hadn't found the answer. And so then their next step was to take the brain. But it should never, ever have been the first step. Anyways, 99% of the show is great and scientifically accurate as possible within the realm of storytelling. I do really appreciate their efforts overall with this. It was really well done, but of course I gotta find something to ruin. And hopefully next season they consult with their scientific consultant just a little bit more. Okay, that's all I have for this final episode of the first season of Tierah Ruins Things with Science. I am a researcher, not a doctor, so again, please don't take any of this as medical advice. It is for entertainment only. If you like the show, please go leave a rating or maybe even a review either on Apple Podcasts or in the Google Play Store if you're able. That would really help me out and I would appreciate it. You can follow me on Twitter at Biology Selfies, even though I don't tweet much, Facebook at Tierah Ruins Things with Science, and on TikTok at Tierah Ruins Things. If all those things still exist when you come to listen to this episode anyway. I will put links in the show notes as well as a link to where you can see all my sources at tierahruinsthings.com. Thanks for listening, and thank you to everyone who helped me bring this episode and this whole season to life. A special thank you to my friend Jeremy Nordstrom, who worked on the set of The Last of Us TV show and who is featured in the bonus episode. I do all the research, writing, and recording, and the music is written and provided by James Stratton Crawley, who also helps with the editing, and there is a link to his channels in the show notes. If you have any suggestions for TV shows or movies featuring diseases or pathogens that you'd like me to cover, as always, send them in to tierahruinsthings@gmail.com. See you all next season.